question. All set to go.
Okay. Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Matthew Jacobs. I work in the Global Media Partnerships team in Amplifi. One of my focuses is the TV stack, which some of you may be aware of. Recently we've been doing a lot of work in the TV stack around trying to equalize how people think about different video views and video impressions, as the amount of channels available to us has expanded so much over the past few years. And that's what I wanted to do a little bit of a setup on today, explain where our current thinking stands. It's still very early, very fresh, but we're on a journey, and we really want to be the industry leader in this space. And then I'm going to host a panel of very distinguished panelists from our creative partners, from our media partners, Facebook, Adobe and Samba. So we'll be able to have a bit more discussion. We'd love to get everybody involved who's here. So I'll kick off. So what we mean by the attention economy is, I think we know by now that, with the work of Byron Sharp, that high attention campaigns do grow brands. A lot of our clients are coming to us with specific requests around, reach, and our TV needs to deliver X amount, and we know that that's because there's a lot of marketing science which explains the impact of having such high reach from growing brands. But that said, the amount of attention that we're able to get is becoming more difficult. So, there's talk about the average attention span now in the age of social from consumers being about 8 seconds, which is just above a goldfish. So it's becoming harder and harder to capture consumers' attention, especially on the new platforms and with smartphones, given they're so distracted. And so, so I think if you can see the kind of graph there, we can see that since the 1940s, we'd have this kind of slow evolution of video formats, starting with sort of spot TV, which kicked off then, but then in the 90s and 2000s started to kick off into what we know as roll formats, so pre-roll, online, mid-roll. Still fairly similar to spot in terms of how it's traded. It's an interruptive medium. You have to sort of wait for the advertising to get through to the content. But recently we've had this explosion in the amount of media from feeds and stories from Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, etc. And it's created a completely different relationship with consumers. And that's really what we've needed to get our head around, because so it used to be this case where you'd have to watch ads. That was the sort of consumer contract. If you watch the ads, you could then unlock the content that you're willing to watch. But now with feed and story, what we're finding is it's really ads competing with content, because Facebook don't stop you getting to your news feed and make you watch an ad to get into a news feed. The ads appear alongside with your friends' stories and all the other content that you're watching. And so it's really now we're in this competitive environment where, yes, we still have a lot of money invested in sort of the old style of media, but we have to now begin to compete and make ads that are very competitive to grab consumers' attention and grow our clients' businesses. Oh, we've lost. Okay, there we are. And I won't spend too much on this, but what we're seeing is that excuse me. Okay, what we're seeing is that these new formats, from YouTube TrueView, the skippable types of TrueView, to Twitter, to Facebook, Snapchat, they don't fit into our old model of cost and reach and how we're used to planning for traditional TV-based clients. And the costs and the reach are just totally different. And so we're getting a lot of questions when we're trying to implement against cost and reach with these new platforms about how equivalized they are and how different. And clients are saying, well, and some planning teams, can we hold everything to 30 seconds? And that's sort of the sort of question we're getting, and say, well, I've got my 30 seconds, but I just want it to be across everything and everybody to watch it all. But I think what we're finding is, even in TV, you're not paying for a 30-second ad, you're paying for the opportunity to see. And so, the way that we're defining TV advertising and how an impression is defined is that, within a minute, as long as somebody spent the majority of their time on one channel, then that the channel is awarded the impression, but it's not necessarily a complete view. And we look at the digital ecosystem. The way that a view is defined varies massively by platform to platform. So YouTube define a view at sort of the 30-second mark, Facebook at the 3-second mark, Twitter 2 or 3, Snapchat don't even have views. So digital has become this really confusing place where there isn't as much consistency. So this is what we really want to do, is to sort of move the conversation from planning around impressions to planning for attention. And if we look at how the MRC, the Media Rating Council in the US, define the advertising process, at the moment the viewability debate is between when an ad is delivered versus when an ad is then viewed, and so that's where the kind of debate around when an impression should be comes up. Where we sort of want to move the industry towards is around attention. So we should be optimizing towards. We know that they've already paid attention, but have they paid attention to the part of the ad that the brand message is really delivered in? And so that's what we're talking about, planning for attention rather than impressions, which is a capability that we're building out. So the first thing we want to understand is, right, well, how much of this TVC or adaptation do we want watched? And this is where we're playing around with the concept of a brand view. So a brand view would be, right, within a spot, this is exactly the point where we think the core message has come across, and so we're going to count everybody that's come up to this point, because this is what the marketer wants to get across. So in the case of this Microsoft Surface ad, the viewable impression would be right at the start of the ad, which is essentially a blank screen. So yes, there was an opportunity to see, but it didn't convey what the marketer was trying to get across. Whereas over on this side would be the full video view. But obviously not everybody on a platform like Facebook or Snapchat is going to get there. So really there's a place in the middle where we want to draw a line and to say, this is what we think is a valuable impression. And so this is where the concept of brand view comes in. And in this series of ads, they often talk about the way that you can draw on a Microsoft Surface tablet like you can on a piece of paper. And so that's sort of the key message that client's trying to get across. And so that's where we would count that brand view. And we've been working with mcgarrybowen a lot around defining the overall purpose of a creative, and then trying to understand, right, if it's an awareness ad, where are we calling that brand view versus a perception versus a conversion job? And that's sort of what we've been taking out to our agencies and getting them to understand. Finally, we then need to understand, right, if we've defined when in an ad or how much attention we need, the next is how likely are they to get to that brand view. So what's the channel change rate on TV or the YouTube skip rate? And so for that we need benchmarks, and we are now going to try and create a central brand view database for Dentsu Aegis network, working with our partners at Samba and Facebook, etc., to build a sort of benchmark catalog across all of these, so that planners can, in the upfront process, understand how likely they are to, before they've run the ad, to get to a certain part of the ad. And we have some early indications. So for TV, I don't think TV's ever really been held in the past to a view-through rate, or even any kind of digital metric. It's always been sort of spots and reach and GRP. But what we can start to see is that this is a study from Q4 last year, just looking at the US market. And what we can see is that actually it's really interesting. So the view-through rates, if you will, of a TV ad can range anywhere from sort of 20 to 30%, with big variation by category. As well as time of day. So prime time, you're less likely to get people to watch all the way through than earlier in the day or overnight. For pre-roll, we've looked at some moat benchmarks, and again, environment has a massive effect on whether somebody is likely to give your ad attention. So a mobile web environment is not going to be as compelling as an in-app seamless experience, and obviously desktop with a larger screen is really powerful for driving that completion rate there. And when we've been working with Facebook to understand the impact of creative, because however we've cut the data from a targeting and other kind of measurement perspective, creative is the biggest thing that makes an impact on whether somebody will complete an ad or not on Facebook. And so we're looking through 3,500 creatives in Dan across 11 markets and trying to play with different creative factors and see how that affects the attention that they're going to get. And what we'd like to do is to then take this out to the network and give planners a sort of means and ammunition to go to clients and go to their partners and say, we know what works on Facebook and the creative partners. And finally, with story, Snapchat data is few and far between, but what we found is market maturity. Actually, some of the more advanced markets that have had Snapchat for longer tend to have a lower completion rate. So there's still, I think, a novelty factor around Snapchat, but we're going to obviously keeping an eye on them and doing as much work as we can. So just quickly on a final point to wrap up, Red Bull have been really forward thinking on this and have taken it into their planning process, and what they're starting to see is they can equivalize the views by using this methodology. And actually, yes, platforms like social platforms do become more expensive on their plans, but not necessarily more than other channels, and I think it does start to create a bit of a leveling off and a flattening, which helps planners have confidence in all of the different places that they can place creative. So with that said, I think I'd like to welcome up the panel. We can talk more about the economy, so you can come up and... Should we take a moment then to introduce ourselves? I'll start off with yourself, Shawna.
Hi, my name is Shawna Ross, and I am the Executive Planning Director at mcgarrybowen Chicago.
Hi there, George Ruiz, Head of Agency Measurement for Facebook.
Dan Ackerman, Chief Commercial Officer for Samba TV.
Todd Gordon, I lead the TV business for the Adobe Advertising Cloud.
Perfect, thank you. Shawna, just to kick off with yourself, I know you've prepared some thoughts, and I just wanted to talk. We don't often hear from the creative side of our business. You know, we're sometimes in a bit of a media bubble, and we assume the creatives are sort of off on their own, and we don't know how to engage with them. It'd be really interesting to hear your perspective from kind of a very well-established TV, you know, creating amazing TV assets and trying to get into the digital space. How are you guys at mcgarrybowen sort of? And I know you've got some thoughts. How are you guys taking this on as a challenge?
Yeah, and we've had quite a lively discussion around it already, just amongst us. And I have prepared some thoughts, and I'll share those with you in a second. But you know, the gist of those thoughts really is the fact that you know, we talk a lot here about optimization and making sure you're getting the eyeballs, and how do we make sure that that's being measured, etc. And what I was sharing with this team here is that, from a creative perspective, when you go into a creative briefing and say, here are the best practices for Facebook, and let's go back and redo the beautiful, you know, video that you shot and optimize it for Facebook, you get dirty looks and oftentimes get thrown out of the room. You are the least popular person in the room. And we have had some teams at our agency actually say, if you come in and you show me Facebook's best practices, this sort of thing. And so I've apologized already to my Facebook colleagues here. Just in full candor, but I think there's a larger there's a larger learning that comes out of that anecdote, right? And that is to say, you know, look, it's great. We are getting more and more and more data, and the empiricalness of it is something to be reckoned with, and we can't disavow that. And I think that's where the struggle is how do you really acknowledge? I'm picking on Facebook, but it's really every social platform has their best practices. And I think for us, it was, as we sought to chat with our creatives about it, was sort of finding the common language and really getting in and saying, like, hey, you guys are all about, you put people first, you put the consumers first, that's at the core of your idea. How can we think about some of these new platforms in that same vein? So I'm going to kind of pop up here. Okay. So what we started to say here is, you know, when we talk about digital first, people-centric is the path to digital first, right? It's not about telling one story in different mediums, but it's about enacting a point of view in relevant ways through the right mediums. And this was a very big thing for us, right? We have this process that we do a great job of telling stories. We really do. We get accolades on it all the time. We've got a great process to distill it down to what's the one thing that your brand wants to stand for, what's the one thing that your brand wants to say, and we've done quite well with that, and we've gotten accolades for our creative in that way. But really it is about, like, it started to feel quite repetitive. It's, you get the idea, you put it here, you optimize there, it looks the same here. And it wasn't really working for us. So what we were doing is we were getting we were good at getting the right idea, but we weren't great at getting the ideas right, if you will, right? That distillation process was working for us. This second part is a bit of a new process for us. So just a quick thing of background, we say simple and true philosophies guide. We're all about storytelling, as many creative agencies are. This happens to be what mcgarrybowen's is. I'm sure any of you who work at a creative agency have your thing, right? But it ends up in this kind of moral of the story and then the big organizing idea, which is something that we all rally behind. That was getting the idea right. We were quite good at that. But this new, what we're calling action mapping, is a way to sort of get to those ideas and to help us not have to go into a creative meeting only by saying, put the logo in the first 3 seconds on Facebook, put this, but really get at the heart of people problems and solve digitally that way. So we say it's about having a point of view, and then it's about having the brand role, right? So we believe, right? Again, we're a story-led agency. We're a conviction-led agency. What is, when we think about our brand, that guiding point of view? But from a brand role, that's equally important, and that gets to some of these actions that we weren't really so good at. That's how we show up on Facebook. That's how we show up on Snapchat. So the brand role married with the brand point of view says, we believe this, but we will. What are we going to do as a result of that, right? What are we going to go do out in the world? So I can't totally read this, so I'm going to scoot over here. We say, there's a people tension first, there's a people need. And how do we start with that people need? Again, we don't want to come in with the thing, so we start with the people need. And then we ask a big provocative question, right? And at that point, you look at the powerful context. What are some of the problems that people are having in your category or out in your world? You know what your brand stands for. How can we enact that role to really make sure they're helping in places and spaces that matter? So point of view drives relevant action. It's all still point of view based, but it is avoiding a scenario where you sort of copy and paste your big organizing idea or your tagline everywhere. And the first one is all about sort of singular and evergreen, but the bottom changes as frequently as people do. People's needs and some of these platform needs are changing all the time. How can we show up in ways that make a lot of sense? So I don't know, not all of you are from the United States, but do people know Oscar Mayer or the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile? It is a ridiculous, 20-foot hot dog that tours the world, tours the US, I should say. Over the summer, and there's some magic that accompanies it. If you see it, everybody smiles. There's selfies galore. What we tried to do as we were really testing out this new process is sort of say with Oscar Mayer, again, just to show you how this works. What was our point of view? What was that big organizing idea? Well, this was a year where they made all of their hot dogs better. They took all the ingredients out, and so this notion of getting a hot dog in everybody's hand. The big organizing idea was for the love of hot dogs. But what we started to say is, from a people tension perspective, excuse me, what's the real thing? Well, there's a lot of people who want better food. They don't have access. I just cannot read this. But the question was, how can we do this? And then the powerful context is access. Somebody else might need to read it for me.
You can read it more.
What's that?
If you come to the front, you can read it.
Okay,
easier.
thank you. Yeah, so, right. So the places and spaces where people need it, right? So we said, take the Wienermobile on a ride to crazy places. The idea, we took the Wienermobile to Whittier, Alaska. We captured it, we put this stuff on YouTube, but the idea was about doing crazy, interesting things with the Wienermobile. How we show up, it's optimized for the different channels that we're in. But you're asking yourself a different question. It's not what 30-second spot are we going to go make and how are we going to optimize it for YouTube and Facebook. It's if the idea is about taking the Wienermobile to places and spaces it's never been, how do we think about that in relevant channels where people are engaging with it? So I'm not going to play that video. I just wanted it to play in the background. I just skipped by a Twitter thing because I don't want to take up the whole thing. But we let Twitter drive the Wienermobile. People could submit questions, and they wanted to do a promposal, and so that's something that's really relevant to that platform and that space. And it's great, and that's how that idea manifests in a relevant way, enacting that point of view. Finally, and this is a bit of a not a total reveal. You'll see we've grayed some things out, but this idea of if you're committed to getting a hot dog into everybody's hands, how do you take the magic of the Wienermobile and replicate it in other vehicles that can get it to places and spaces? So there's a big reveal coming in a few weeks, given it's the summer and hot dog time. But I hope you get to see, I'm sorry for the slides, but hopefully you can start to see what we mean and how we think about not just optimizing, but really building for those right scenarios.
Yeah, really interesting. Because oftentimes I think we're often lumbered with a big master brand creative that's expected to work in every place and space. And not to say that there's no need for a master brand point of view, it's just, as you say, you might have to be more action orientated on some of these more immediate platforms like Facebook and Snapchat. Yeah. George, being from Facebook and probably finding that quite interesting for the first time hearing it, did you want to talk, respond or talk anything about that? Or and also, I know we've done a lot of research together into the attention economy, if you wanted to speak about that.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Matt. I think I kind of wanted to go back to what you started with, opening with Byron Sharp and how brands grow, because in many ways, if you want to look at understanding advertising effectiveness, and you can do the rational left brain kind of work by saying, I have a campaign, I have a couple of assets, if I have good experiments or I have good models, how do I find effectiveness? So you can say, so in this journey, the real conversation we want to have is not about the attention economy, but the impact economy. The challenge is that oftentimes it can be a little bit, the paradox is, in order to get to impact, today as an industry, we're still on attention. And it has to be attention because it's about workflow, and it's just the dynamics of how an idea comes to life and how that idea becomes a campaign. So we end up in this situation to where the research that we've done together in the industry, stuff that we've published, you start seeing this theme as to, when you go into the details, you'll see that across most mobile platforms, or just new media and new kinds of measurement, you'll increasingly find that you can find campaigns that are effective and efficient, but not necessarily equivalent. And the reason for that is because the consumer experiences that they're now under their control. Again, we're competing for content, not necessarily trying to gateway the content. So there's this conundrum to where the equivalency is getting harder and harder. But the measurement systems, the people-based measurement delivery systems, the causality, the experiments are helping to send proof. And yet that's not enough. And I'll give you an example. So some of the research that we've done, we've also corroborated by publishing some additional research publicly in our Insights blog around the notion of how with video, duration matters, and you will see the more duration, the more impact for ad recall, awareness, and purchase intent. But the real payoff is immediate because consumers can process information immediately. You can run all the control groups you want, but you'll still see this paradox that says you can have a lot of reach and a lot of impact immediately. You're just having to compete a lot to get that additional duration. So where you end up in the situation to where we've started talking about, we started our projects with the vision of the impact economy. But the work is coming back, and when we're still struggling on the next step is left brain talking to right brain. How do we actually get the workflow and the creative ideas to come to life? So our work has been, we're in this place to where we will continue to pursue and chase anything and everything where we can have a better way to deliver the impact economy. In parallel, we want to continue to find ways to improve how to get the right creative. And that's a hard part, because I do agree that you can't just provide a recipe list of what creative works. That being said, there's a middle ground of, there's a reason why pre-testing solutions are being used by clients for many years. So the part that we're now trying to dig into is to say, well, let's look at all the video creatives that we can get our hands on. We can classify them, the 3,400 that we've done, and kind of go on and take that extra step by saying it's not enough to just look at the impact. It's a very, did it work or not work? But going an extra level on understanding, well, what do we know about this ads? What other assets, what machine learning, what AI systems can we use to classify the attributes within that ad, so we can find some observational patterns and then marry that against outcome data that we have in those campaigns. It's a very tricky thing, but the whole point is to come back, at least say, we don't have the answer, but we have some things that we see that are working, and then use that as a conversation to think about how do we fix this? Is it the pre-production, post-production, and eventually who in the creative team actually it produces mobile-ready assets? So it's less of an issue of using the measurement as opposed to having the creative idea from pre-production come to life.
Yeah, really interesting. And Dan, just to bring you in here, I know we've, I don't know if you want to explain a little bit about Samba TV, but we've worked together to bring some of the rigor that George is talking about that we're taking to online, to linear television, where really we haven't seen that sort of real honing in on these detention or impact numbers before. Did you want to talk a little bit about what we've done together so far?
Sure, yeah, just for some context, Samba TV is a TV data and analytics company. So we have software that sits inside of internet-connected televisions at scale across the globe. And we have a universal view of what's being consumed on that TV. So if it's over the air, if it's OTT, if it's video gaming, any video that is processed and displayed on the screen. And that's not been a purview or a perspective on consumers that we've had before. Before set-top boxes or traditional panels gave you a view of the majority of the entertainment consumption that was happening in a household. That's not true anymore. You're distracted. Now that 4.5 hours a day, maybe a little bit on Netflix, maybe a little bit on Hulu, a little bit on YouTube Red. So there are all of these different sources. So I think fundamentally just understanding consumer behavior is an important starting point, whether it's for creative, whether it's for media optimization. So the work we did was to look at this very granular view. We're capturing what's happening on the screen multiple times per second. So diving into a network, a day part, a program, and an individual ad break to understand the value in that relationship with the consumer. And it's no surprise that the completion rates are fairly low in long-form primetime content. We have ad skipping. We have all kinds of different tools to plow through those ads and get to the content that we want. So I think just first surfacing consumer behavior in how your ads are being consumed, and then using that as fuel to start understanding what creative length, where we put it, when we put it, but also then that relationship with digital, whether it be in Facebook or traditional video and display that's available on the open web, because consumers do have another device in their hand, and that's part of the distraction. So drawing that connection between the two to build up and then leverage the creative. So if the Wienermobile 30-second ad is only being completed at 30%, how do you then continue and personalize that message while you have them in that same frame of mind and in context onto a mobile, tablet, or desktop? That's a difficult challenge for creative. It's a difficult challenge for media buying too.
Yeah.
So fortunately, you have the ability to optimize in the digital space to then create that. And the other side, which we haven't really talked about, is then measuring the impact. What does that mean? What does it mean to not get to that key brand message, but then line up the other touch points to see, did they go to the store and buy a hot dog? Did they think differently about the brand? That's right.
How do you measure that and use that, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so that data and insight then flows in for planning, or into platforms for real-time programmatic execution.
Yeah. Well, speaking of programmatic execution, Todd, from what you've been seeing at Adobe, I know you guys are obviously very rich in data and the ability to micro-target, and how are you finding that affects big broadcast video campaigns that maybe necessarily don't need that sort of specific targeting but still want to get that attention? How can we use sort of programmatic to deliver attention?
Yeah, I think the whole idea behind programmatic is using software and using data so that you know more about who your customer is, and then you're trying to bring them a relevant ad in a relevant environment. I think so that to me has direct impact on really everything that everyone on this panel has said, and a platform can help you understand how that works across many different channels. We see in the digital space that when you're using high quality data that can point you to your client, you see better results. And even for basic metrics like completion rates, in general, a high quality first party targeted campaign has higher completion rates than one that is more broadly targeted. It doesn't happen in every campaign, it depends on the quality of the data, but in general there's evidence that programmatic targeting can lead to campaigns that better hold your intended target's attention than something that's not targeted. The other way that we're really trying to look at the space is at the individual level, getting an understanding of the individual's consumption habits and their willingness to give up some of their precious attention to commercial messages in different environments. And we help brands take a look at that in a holistic way so that they can make smart decisions about which of these many channels it makes sense to allocate their spend to. And one of the things that comes out, especially when it relates to TV, is that people still watch a lot of TV. It's an environment where a heavy commercial load is a part of the experience, and consumers accept that at a very high level. But we abuse that attention, and we abuse it by not really using data as much as you could. And so when we analyze campaigns, we see that repeatedly a small part of the target is exposed to the ad many times. So excessive frequency against a small part of your audience, and then under frequencying equally valuable customers that are in your target audience that, because of their behavior, just aren't seeing the spot at once at the same amount. So
just to pick up on what you were saying about all this data that's available and hyper targeting and frequency, Shawna, how do you think that would make a creative feel? I know, and it's probably coming from a completely different world, and it'd be interesting to hear a McGarrybowen perspective on the amount of data that you could really use to target.
I mean, I guess
too much?
No, I think what I would say too is that I don't. I know I sort of drew a hard line in the beginning, but I think, look, data is only going to make us smarter, and even as we talked about in this process, right? Like, we need inputs. We need inputs to start with, to say, how are people using a certain platform? What are they doing? What is that behavior? What does that look like? What are the needs? So, I think for us, it's like, how do we just best use that and channel that data creatively as a critical input, versus, again, just sort of saying, here are the empirical ways to do things, right? But it's a critical input. It will only help.
You referenced some research earlier comparing a social network to television in terms of value.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the notion of attribution keeps coming up more and more, and it's difficult to look at just a couple of things in a silo. And to the point of kind of the value of the view is looking at where the duration of that view has the most impact. There are visual and audio combined environments like television that can have a pretty emotional impact. So a few seconds there may be more impactful than others. I think the other thing is it was so focused on viewability and viewability metrics being for so few seconds, and really more about what is that collective amount of time that the consumer has spent with the brand with these different creative executions across platforms. But bring all of those in a completely agnostic way, look at all of the different places that it was, and then do attribution and looking at all of those together. It's really difficult just to compare one or two different mediums.
No, I think that's really interesting. George, do you sort of agree with that approach and having to look across all of these different channels differently, or do you think sort of maybe like a Facebook newsfeed is a special case where it can't be held in that way to the same account as a TV or a YouTube sort of ad?
I wonder how much time I have to give the actual nuanced answer.
The top line.
Exactly. So I think the way I look at it is, so yes, we have to start doing more measurement systems where it's not just about impact but comparability. The subtle challenge with that is, I think what's happening in the industry, and you will see this accelerate as your business grows with addressable television. Because if you take this to the extreme, what you're going to be looking for is measurement that understands the comparability to the person, not to the format. We're just going to struggle for the next couple months or years on trying to find ways to get these new measurement systems, this creative workflows, and the way that the systems are built today to go from measuring attention and proxies into outcomes. Because what I mentioned earlier is, you can't do outcome studies. They just come back with very prescriptive things that are not as helpful. Like, I can come back and say, your study was positive for Oscar Mayer with that Datalogic's ROI of sales of 3x. It doesn't help you as much knowing that in some of the video assets, you had a 33% completion rate that you found on television and whatever the Facebook number is, but yet it's sold. So there's this paradox of, until we get to more systems where you can actually have a comparison to the person, the viewability issue will be less of a problem, but we do have to understand, first of all, about the workflow and understanding how to get what we have today to making sure that we continue to actually build brand value.
And you talked about targeting the right people, and that's obviously with people-based marketing at Facebook really important. Do you think, I mean, this is an open question to the panel, but do you think there's a danger with targeting that you just end up going after people who are most likely to give you attention, and they may be the people that are already going to buy your brand? You know, one other thing that Byron Sharp talks about is reaching people who don't know you and don't love you, and actually by hyper-targeting you may end up just kind of speaking to the preaching to the converted and not opening that up. And
that is my biggest worry. Because when you actually see what's going on, there's just the problem is the strategy is right. It's the execution and the details sometimes where you see once you audit a campaign, the best work that you can do is go find the campaigns that failed. Find out the campaigns that had no statistical lift, and then talk to the teams and figure out what happened. Because then you'll see sometimes the gaps like we ended up over-targeting, or we ended up putting a creative that wasn't fit for this, or we set up a campaign goal that was opposite.
did you have
Yeah, I mean, you know, from a TV perspective, I think there is danger in over-targeting. Some of the magic of TV, and I think some of the reason why the ROI of TV has held up so well in the face of a lot of different media channels, is that there's a mystery, and your spot does get to people that may not be purely in your target, and that helps build brands and helps influence you and drive sales in interesting and unexpected ways.
And sure, how do you think the creatives feel about that? So, or even yourselves as mcgarrybowen, like, are you looking to talk to everyone with this kind of campaign, or can you imagine being able, when you know, with the data that where you can start to speak to individual groups of people? Is that a compelling sort of brief for a creative? Or
yeah, I mean, I think one of the issues when we get down to like this one-on-one targeting. Again, I don't want to shy away from it. Because I think there's insights that we can learn and we can always be building. And look, at the end of the day, we're trying to make an emotional connection, right? That's what this is about, whether it's one-on-one or whether it's mass.
Yeah.
In this particular example, the Wienermobile, there's such a great emotional collectivism about the magic of it. And so some of those more mass media channels can feel very right, and yet, for example, in Twitter, it does get a little bit more specific, and there's a tighter community there. So I guess what I would say is just, it is about emotionally connecting, and we're just getting the tools, and you guys are helping with the knowledge to do that better, be it one-on-one, middle, or mass.
yeah, and obviously, you know, we can see the pace of evolution in TV moving towards more of that one-on-one. And obviously, Dan, you guys, with all the data that you have on television and where you're going, you're seeing that. Did you want to talk at least a little bit about, you know, what the demand is? Are people pushing Samba TV to be more of an addressable? I want TV to be one-on-one. Or are they sort of respecting the mass reach, but maybe wanting to get a bit smarter? Like, what are people asking?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of both. It's what you're trying to achieve. So from our perspective, it's just giving the data that helps inform that decision. It is, you know, one-to-one household addressable the right place to be? Is a particular creative tactic or targeting tactic in digital, and the way that that's married up with your TV exposure is the right path to that consumer conversion? I think the other thing that people are very interested in now is the behavior around just, you know, the person that's right. Like, I know that they're going to be right to go buy hot dogs or buy a car. Is what's the lifestyle behavior around that? What kind of programming do they watch? What kind of behavior do they do? And certainly Facebook is rich with that. That leads you to potentially, I should speak to them because I think I can move them into that category of someone that can be converted. So, yeah, the push from the market for us is just to pull in all of that viewership behavior, and then also marry that up with the other devices in the household, so you can understand a better relationship between how those two things are working, how TV is influencing digital, and how digital is helping to complement what's happening in television. Television, fundamentally, as Todd mentioned, it's a brand building vehicle. And it's where you tell stories, it's where you capture emotion, and it's difficult to replicate that in other places.
And that's what Facebook wants to be as well, right? In terms of challenging. Did you want to talk about mass advertising?
The researcher in me often gets confused on how to respond to this, because I just care about it being effective and efficient. If it means, regardless of format or asset, I just want to make sure that there's ROI somewhere down the line. So I think there's some procedural things in terms of, okay, do we have a video campaign? Do we have a person-led campaign? Do we have a target audience campaign? Like, there's a lot of flexibility, because oftentimes things like on the comments around like frequency management, those are things that will get better as you have more. Like we can certainly do it on our end on addressable television. This will be something where it becomes a key lever. So there's going to be a lot of recipes and the mechanics are going to help. But I think the part that worries me is really around the notion of making sure that your teams are, when there's a strategy and a brief executed, that I think there should be more teams that make sure that the executions are actually set up correctly to deliver, so there's no gap. And that's where I've seen a lot of the problems happen.
Yeah, and so there definitely seems to be a lot of consensus around attention maybe being a halfway mark, and that the real goal here is sort of ROI and effectiveness, which makes total sense. But I was just thinking in the creative process, how much discussion is there around ROI? Like if you get a media agency saying, Shawna, we know exactly what's going to sell, you've got to do this. What's the sort of thinking in terms of ROI? Is that too specific? Do you want to be further back in the process?
Yeah, I think it depends what part of the agency you're talking about. I think the account people would be quite, they talk about ROI all the time. I think as a strategist, we have to be very keen into it. Again, walking into a creative briefing to start with ROI is about as popular walking in saying, put your logo in that's just not what for them is going to be driving that kind of thing. But again, it's not something we can ignore. And so it is just how do you take that fodder, channel it in ways that are relevant and motivating, that these teams can still go and do their best work and make that a
We speak in two different languages then in a way, because all of us media people are going, we need ROI, effectiveness, this is what video needs to deliver, and you're like, hey, we're trying to tell a story here. I guess collaboration is probably going to be the most important thing going forward if we're going to solve this. How do you kind of instigate collaboration in mcgarrybowen with your media partners?
Well, I think, we've got some, as part of this very network, and I think as brethren, we do a good job. We work on a lot of things with Kara, for example. I think in general, what we've started to see are these small, diverse, nimble teams. I mean, we've even started in the agency just like working more closely, and again, it's not like, you've got the creative department, yes, but it's how do you kind of pick a couple nimble teams. And I think, though media doesn't sit with us, that notion very much extends, right? As you've got these people who are then working and moving together quickly and all really steeped in any kind of particular problem and solving it with every perspective. That's where these things that, you need all this perspective.
Yeah, and I mean, are you, how about Facebook in terms of collaborating with other parts of the ecosystem? I mean, are you doing it much, or are you talking to the creatives?
Well, it means I have a job. Yes, so we do recognize that we definitely need to staff a lot more, but there's a whole reason why we have a global agency team, regional agency teams. We're recently investing in creative teams, and I tell my team that there's nothing more important for the researchers than to make sure that they're plugged in with the creative teams. If you don't have the right brief, and even forget about what the ROI number is, if you can't get behavior change, the research is not good. You have to get them to move something. So one of the coolest projects that we worked on was actually one of the simplest research projects for me, which was, can you get the creative teams with Dan to actually be able to actually do some optimization work? I know it's pre and post, but we have to start somewhere, because the learning is how collectively does the organization understand what the workflow look like, so it's not painful the next time around.
That's right.
I just wanted to say, from the Adobe perspective, one of the more fascinating things about the combination of Adobe assets is the core Adobe Creative Cloud business. It's in a really interesting place in the creative community, and it's a couple of steps back in the roadmap of what we want to do together. But when you think about those creative assets matched to the data about advertisers that the Adobe Experience Cloud, Marketing Cloud has, and ways of having that creative experience match more directly through technology to the advertising experience is really fascinating.
I think we're just coming up to time here, so I don't know if any of you had any last thoughts about the future and sort of where we think we're going to be in sort of 4 or 5 years with this attention economy and impact economy. To close up on.
Just a quick note, I applaud you for starting this process. I think there's not enough attention on understanding the value across all these different formats. So making the commitment to continue to extract the insights and make them actionable across creative, across media optimization, all the different touch points where marketers spending money and having their goal of creating brand affinity and selling products. So I would just love to see this continue and go deeper.
Thanks very much.
I agree 100%. And definitely understanding we will see a lot of change in the next 2 to 5 years in terms of thinking about all this planning work, but definitely seeing that there's this cross-functional work that's happening. It is the most crucial step that we could be doing.
Yeah, and I would just say, I think, to me, this whole panel and this whole experience is, you can't just have ROI, you can't just have creative, right? Creative for the sake of creative is not working in today's world, and ROI and optimizing and optimizing and optimizing loses some of the connection that we try and do with people. So they're really, I think we're all invested and collectively across the industry in a very noble effort to make the marriage work, and that's the win.
Yeah, I think we can talk a lot about data and technology and process. If we can keep the consumer in mind and keep them first and actually think about their experience and the experience of them being exposed to advertising and influenced and hopefully buying product, if we can do that in a way that is more holistic and respects the consumer's giving you a lot of clues about who they are and what they want. If we can use that in a respectful way and keep them first ahead of kind of the technology, then ultimately we can all win in this space.
Well, I want to thank everybody who's attended so far, and thank my panelists today. So thanks all very much for coming.
Thank you.